So, welcome everyone. We are here tonight with a panel of gentlemen, and I really want to thank Gray and Corey for assembling this motley crew of characters, men, with many with a great deal of experience in the topic that we're going to discuss tonight, which is the topic of formation. And I think all of us here recognize that we live in extraordinary times. There are extraordinary temptations with with all of us, but especially in the youth today. And so formation in our current time, our current moment, is probably more important than ever, but also more difficult than ever. And so that's the topic that we're going to discuss tonight, but in estuary style. And we're going to start with introductions because some of these figures are not not well known among the people who at least watch my channel and whoever other channels post this conversation. So, hi everybody, I'm Neil. I was raised PCUSA, Presbyterian, and I deconstructed post 9/11. I was very much in the Sam Harris camp. I discovered Jordan Peterson with Sam Harris's first conversation with JBP, and then I watched the Genesis series, and that unlocked a lot for me. I went through some extraordinary experiences in my own life and was brought to faith. And my wife's a cradle Catholic, and I entered the Catholic Church in 2019, Easter, and that was fortuitous because the following Easter was canceled, and that was good timing. And I've steadily become more involved in my church. I now teach in the topic of formation. I now teach a Bible class for Catholic catechumens, ages 8 to 11, and it's like that Protestant background is bringing all the biblical connections and also channeling some Jonathan Pajot and others into that Bible class, and starting with Jesus and working our way backwards. And it seems to be having a desired effect, but also talking about serious things like personal loss, suffering, the problem of evil, stuff like that. So, yeah. So that's my introduction. That's why I'm here tonight. Corey.
Cool. Thanks, Neil. I'm Corey. Let's see. I grew up in California in a non-denominational evangelical church. And there's never been a time that I really fell away from the faith. I'd never really deconstructed in that sense. But big part of my story is I grew up really lonely. Even though I was going to church, I was doing all the things. My parents had me in youth group, Awanas, Bible studies, all those things. But the formation that I received was, it's a complicated thing. It's difficult to point fingers at. I wouldn't want to point fingers necessarily on why things worked out the way they did. But I'm passionate about this because I had an experience when I went to college where I was almost brought into existence by the experience of joining a Christian fraternity. And it involved sitting down with other dudes who were my age and a little bit older than me, who gave me, I was required to tell my story, basically, one-on-one with 20 different dudes over the course of a few months. And it was like learning how to have real human relationship for the first time in my whole life. And the experience was so transformative for me. It's almost as if I look at that as the time that I learned what it was like to have a relationship with God. I was actually gifted the opportunity to actually love people, to know what it was like to love and to be loved. But since then, let's see, big parts. I joined the Marine Corps after college, so that was a big part of my formation as well. I'm married. I've been married for 10 years. I've got 4 kids. I've been an instructor in the Marine Corps now for a while. I'm about to finish with that. And as of 3 years ago, I guess 5 years ago is when it kicked off, I also found Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pajot, John Vervaeke. I'm now Catholic, Eastern Catholic, so a strong Orthodox bent there. But I'm very interested in this topic, and I'm really excited to hear what all of you have to say about it, because it's something that I'm passionate about personally.
Thank you, Corey. Zep.
All right. Well, my name is John. Zep's my last name. I grew up Catholic. I was the youngest of 8 kids, like a Catholic family. 5 boys, 3 girls. My parents obviously were older when they had me, but my, good Catholic, loving family. My dad was a pretty disciplinarian type of guy, but loving. He created a lot of structure and boundaries for our family. He had a strong work ethic. He was in charge of the budget for our local factory, which had like 2,400 employees in it. So pretty big job, but he worked hard. He was also a silent generation, which is kind of unusual. I mean, he was older, obviously, when I was born. So, but we did also have a computer in the house since I was 7, which is kind of unusual. A couple of different unusual things. But there was never any fighting in our home, like ever. You know, it's an interesting thing that's come up many times with my friends. Like nobody ever. No, we had a great family, very cooperative. My dad provided most of that structure. My mom was very loving and nurturing. Went to Catholic grade school, 1st to 8th grade. Went to public high school. Encountered something called Young Life there, which is a kind of a parachurch organization. They preach the gospel, and went to a Young Life camp. That's where I met Christ personally, even though I had been in church many times for whatever reason. I didn't encounter him in a way that meant anything to me at that time. Probably that's on me, definitely. But then I've been involved with teenagers a lot. I think our topic will no doubt focus on young people a bit. So that's why those topics I'm picking. And then I after high school, I went to college for a bit, but I ended up not finishing college. Instead, I opened a pizza shop, which is what was my high school job. And I had that for 25 years. So sold it about 2 years ago. Definitely been around kids and teenagers my whole life. I was an uncle when I was 8. Seen a lot of different upbringings and styles. And I have 3 kids of my own, married 29 years. And as a dad, though, I was a little different than my dad. I continued the strong work ethic, but I went kind of away from the disciplinarian side of things. And looking back, now all my kids are adults now. I think that may have created a few problems for them. Certainly, I didn't create enough boundaries and enough structure for them, especially in the digital age where, as we all know, the internet is anything goes. So that's kind of my formation story, I guess I would say.
Thank you, John.
Cale.
Cale?
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. So my name is Cale Zeldin. I am, let's see. Well, I'm a teacher, and so I work with teenagers, and I've worked with teenagers in my particular spot for, I think this is my 19th school year here at the boarding school. I've always taught all 19 of my years here. 12 of those 19 years, I was an administrator, first as the academic dean, and then the second half of that as the dean of faculty. So I had, in some sense, my job was to form students and parents, sort of. And then the second half, I was trying to form teachers. And, that's hard. And I really hope we can kind of get into the kind of is that there's not a lot of structure unless you can kind of muster it up on your own, kind of like a moral and mental and you know policing structure. So anyway, we can get into that later on. I'm a cradle Catholic, born in New Orleans, uh, grew up in South Louisiana. We moved to Baton Rouge when I was in 5th grade. Um, my mom was also a cradle Catholic. My dad was raised a kind of, at best, a high holy day Jew. Um, they got married in 1968, which was pretty unusual for a non-Catholic to marry a Catholic. But my father eventually wound up converting to Catholicism when I was in kindergarten. um, for no, a little baby right before that, because he received his first communion on the same day as my older brother received his first communion, which would have been in second grade. You get the deal. Anyway, went to Catholic schools my entire life. We were again, relatively devout family. We went to mass on Sundays. Um, Mom got increasingly more serious about practicing her faith when I was, a young boy, and so we would say the occasional rosary. That became more frequent as we got a little bit older. Um, but my parents came from a generation in which you outsourced formation almost entirely to the Catholic school that you sent your child to. And so it was with much shock that they found out that Catholic schools had largely forfeited that formative role and had kind of turned themselves into, very kind of secular friendly modes of operation. So I had my flame out with the faith 16, 17, 18, sometime in the middle of my sophomore year of high school. So I sort of tacked hard away. I don't think I ever would have considered myself an atheist, but I definitely considered myself an agnostic. Um, and then I started reading um, books, old books, as I like to bang on about on Twitter. And it was in that process that I realized that these old people really knew some things, and I probably should start um, the work of figuring things out. And then I started realizing that a lot of these old guys, especially, from, you know, I don't know, you know, 50 AD until 1950 AD. A lot of these really smart guys were also Christian, and a lot of them were Catholic. So that was a pretty big eye opener for me. And then I kind of read my way back and into the church that way. And then I transferred to a Catholic college. And that was a very, very informative experience for me. It was a small kind of Ben-Op community, Benedict option type community. It was an alternative Catholic school. Not only were the professors serious intellectuals, but they were also serious about their faith. And I was suddenly surrounded by, around 100 other young people who were serious about the intellectual life and serious about their Catholic faith. And so that was hugely informative for me. So I would say that most of my formation took place later on in life. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Kale. Bill.
Oh yeah, we're going around the clock. Okay, Bill Merkel, recovering electrical engineer, recently retired just about 8 months ago. When I thought through this little part, definitely thought about family. Like John Zepp, my father was a World War II era Navy man, into discipline, quiet, and extreme integrity, and high value for the truth, and a very strong work ethic. And I was blessed with inheriting much of that. He was also a mourning Catholic, a Catholic in mourning. I was born and raised in the Catholic Church. I didn't realize until in my late 30s that my father was in mourning over Vatican II.
Yeah.
And therefore, he never practiced really. I mean, he did mechanistic Catholicism, I would say. But one day when I was 15 or 16 and starting to question things, I wanted to talk to him about his faith. And I was told it was none of my business. And that's the way that generation dealt with things. I did a lot of reading. I didn't trust that I happened to be born in the right faith just because I happened in a Catholic household. So I spent many years searching and didn't meet and bend the knee to Christ until I was about 35. And after that, I attended a weekend called the Walk to Emmaus, which is based on Roman Catholic Curcio. And I embraced that lifestyle in full. We were taught piety, study, and action as the three legs of the stool of the life and grace. And so for the last 30 years, I've been doing that. And that has done a lot to form me, that consistency in those three areas through all these years, including one very relational practice of a weekly accountability group. So I've been in a weekly accountability group for 30 years. And one of the friends of mine there, we've been together for about 25 to 27 of those. So you get to know each other and you don't get away with much at that point. Formation wise, I was in a Lutheran church when I met Christ, and I am currently non-denominational. And as I thought back, I very quickly got drawn into what I guess I call formational activities. I love that question because I'd never thought of my life, what formed me. So this question has filled my mind for the last few days. So I did things like take a week from vacation every year and do vacation Bible school with the little kids. I ended up leading an Emmaus weekend, which means you form a team of 22 men and you take 25 to 35 pilgrims through a 72-hour thing. I started a nonprofit for education down in inner city Cleveland, which and I was chair of the board for 8 years, and it's down there successfully now, serving hundreds of children. So there's just many ways where I've been involved in formation, and I guess I will leave it at that for my background.
Thank you, Bill. Father.
Okay, I am Father Daniel Greason. I'm an Orthodox priest, but it was a circuitous route to getting here. Let's see here. I grew up in a household. My father was a minister in the Churches of Christ, a cappella, and I could get even more specific because it starts to get narrower and narrower. But if you want more information, Vanderclay and I had a conversation where we talked a little bit more detail about that. So I'm not going to go into all that detail because there's a lot to talk about with that. My father had met my mother. My mother grew up very lukewarm Methodist in Bloomington, Indiana, and they met at Indiana University. So, sorry, I have to mention that right now.
You have to.
They went to the Bulls. I think they're going to the championship too. But so I grew up with like Bobby Knight in the background of my entire life, even though I grew up in Arkansas. My father started really preaching after he graduated law school, actually, because his father was also a minister, and he didn't go the law he was kind of dabbling in politics, and he went and did preaching. Because in Churches of Christ, it's not really a pastor. In fact, you don't say pastor, you say preacher. So my childhood growing up, sometimes say I kind of grew up on the frontier in the 19th century in some ways, even though I grew up still watching like X-Files and The Simpsons, because the religiosity that I grew up in was kind of like frontier Protestantism. Like I went to debates growing up between like Oneness Pentecost. My dad would be on debates. He had like a radio show. I mean, it seems like that seems forever ago, but this is just the 90s, right? I didn't realize how weird childhood I had in some ways until, you grow up and encounter the world. So there was, in my household, that meant Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday night, and we'd have like gospel meetings every once in a while, which wasn't really a revival because Churches of Christ really aren't evangelical in that sense. They're kind of a different, anyway, I don't want to get into too much in the weeds because everything can get very detailed very quickly, but everything growing up for me was very kind of cerebral, and it was very information. And when I got to college, I was already having questions about how the religious formation I had, because everything was going on in my household, even education-wise in general, was still kind of directed towards Christianity, but didn't really know how to connect to it because in many ways the way I grew up was very sectarian. There's kind of the world and then there's the church. And so when I got to college and I started reading a lot of philosophy, etc. And I realized very quickly that what I grew up in, if you're going to put it in a philosophical like world, was the whole roots of the Churches of Christ, etc., was Scottish common sense philosophy, Thomas Reid, Enlightenment stuff. So once I started reading about that, I was like, I grew up in a completely kind of Enlightenment, even though it's like very conservative Christian of a certain Protestant type. Sorry for the background noise. It's children going to bed. There you go. So this is the weeping lamentation of my youth too, probably coming through. So what you have with that formation is everything is about information and not about any kind of other formation going on. Your heart, it's very rationalistic. Let's just say it like that. So the reality, how much is it coming through? Is it coming through?
We're okay.
Yeah, you're a lot louder than
So-
your kids for the time being. So you're good.
Good. Okay. So I read too much when I got to college and realized the background and where I was coming from, and realizing that I needed a broader formation because I was also had read T.S. Eliot. I read poetry and I was into music. I was into a lot of broader things. So I knew that there was a world outside of what I'd grown up in. And so, but all my questions kept me on a kind of philosophical, trying to uncover what was going on and how do I read where I'm at and what's going. So my deconstruction, if you want to say it like that, was mostly kind of encountering at the time it was emergent church stuff was at its height. So the Brian McLaren, the N.T. Wright was kind of coming to a zenith, Tony Jones, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the stuff that I started reading right when I got to college, it's like 2003, 2004. And so that helped give me better lay the land of where I was at. But that didn't make me go off in that direction for very long because I was also interested in Catholic Worker and like Shane Claiborne and that kind of stuff, if you all are familiar with any of that stuff. So I was also interested in like how to actually live this out and embody the gospel. And somehow I backed my way into either it was Catholicism or Orthodoxy for me, and I ended up around Orthodox and then just became Orthodox basically. That we can go off and so a lot of my formation has been intellectual, but also I've been a priest working on it for 8 years now. So a lot of work, especially now, since I'm sure all of us are kind of tuned in on the online world and the ortho brodom stuff and the woes of orthodoxy are much more available because a lot of the drama is happening online. And this is because as there's a lot of stuff going on and the youth are not okay. So I have had to do a lot of pastoring in a lot of situations, trying to do catechesis and formation with folks who are coming from all over. You know, people think, oh, people coming to Orthodoxy from a particular background. My experience so far is like I've had to try to provide some kind of formation or spiritual direction for people coming from Wicca, just all sorts of stuff. So yeah, I think that's enough for an introduction.
Thank you, Father. Ross.
Hi, I'm Ross Bird, and maybe the only one hailing from the East Coast tonight. It's a little bit later here. Oh, and Kale, nice. And Zep, okay, never mind. I was way off. I'm in Virginia. Grew up in Virginia Beach in the Episcopal Church. One of the I think we're maybe the 10th or 12th largest Episcopal church, which isn't saying much these days because Episcopal churches seem to be dying. But I was grateful to grow up in a church that was not dying, that was that had believing leadership, and even in the very early days when I was really little, sang in the kids' choir, and learned the creeds that way, and was an acolyte, did all those sorts of things. It was kind of a typical mainline church at the time, I guess, in some ways, but as I grew up in the church, our church actually went through kind of an evangelical revival, in some ways for better and for worse. For better in that I got to know Jesus more personally than was normal in a mainline church, but also for worse in that we kind of lost some forms in the process and became sort of less in touch with our own tradition, I guess, in ways that I still lament, and others do as well. And so that sent our church even farther into, I think we went even through like a charismatic revival in my high school years. And then a lot of it imploded through some scandal by the time I was in college. And thankfully now that the church that I grew up in has kind of rebuilt itself in a very healthy way. And so anyway, I got to taste a lot of the faces of Protestantism in my one church growing up. There was a large Young Life community actually too, as well. And so most of my friends, most people in my area actually are kind of the non-denominational bent, or even non-church bent, meeting the Lord in ministries outside of the church, but we're still Christians to one degree or another. And I would say that now almost everyone I know goes to some kind of non-denominational church, including my own family. Though I myself am kind of secretly trying to plant a couple of little Anglican parishes in our town. And so it's a long game there, but that's my history church-wise. I went to seminary myself after college and served a stint as an associate pastor, and was doing lay ministry in the Episcopal Church for a while, and was a music minister as well. And then I was a associate pastor in a non-denominational church for a few years, and that led to me stepping down from church ministry. It was a little bit overwhelming. My family runs a surfing camp at the same time as all of this. So I've been married for about 20 years, and we've been running our surf camp together, my wife and I, for 20 years in the summers. And so we always kind of have had two roles. And so about 8 or 9 years ago, we just decided it was too much to balance. We still felt called to ministry, but it was too much to balance church ministry with also running this camp, which for reasons that we could have never predicted became a huge part of our lives. And so a lot of my formational life now is in forming the staff, 15 or so college and grad student staff that work for us and live with us each summer. Obviously taking care of the kids. We have about 300 or so teenagers that are the members of our surf camp, but I would say our ministry is probably more to the staff than anything else. It's not exactly a Christian surf camp. It is to me, but people come from all different backgrounds and from all over the place. And so the discipleship part is really with our staff. And then at the same time, I teach, as I stepped down from the church, I started teaching theology for a fellows program. I don't know if you guys are familiar with those, but there's some all over the country that started in an Anglican church in Virginia, but they're everywhere now. They're kind of like a post-undergraduate program, like an apprenticeship year-long program to help kids out of college figure out what they want to do, pick an industry of their choice. We help them get a job. And then I do a day of training each week, all day on Fridays, kind of walk through the Christian life. So that's the other thing I do in the off season when I'm not teaching people how to surf. And we have 4 kids and we homeschool them. So that's the other formational piece for me, and maybe the most important reason that this kind of conversation is important to me.
Thank you, Ross. And Gray.
Ross also is a great writer, so he didn't mention that, but he writes words on Substack, and they're great. My name is Gray Hamilton. I am the youngest here, and I guess I'm coming at it from a different angle, being as well. So I guess I grew up in North Carolina on the East Coast. Relevant for my early stages of life would be really 2 things, I guess. So I'm the youngest of 3 boys. My family was attending an Episcopal church when I was born, so I was baptized in the Episcopal church, but I don't have a single memory of attending that church. So I don't think, as far as I know, we stopped going by the time I was 2 or 3. So no catechesis or anything like that. And my mom and dad were largely, my mom was a hippie. So she was, grew up she was born in the 50s and really came of age in the 60s and 70s. And, there's some family lore that I don't know all the details of, that my mom was apparently caught up in the Jesus Revolution. And so that's where the Episcopal thing sort of happened. But my dad was more, Midwestern. He's from Cincinnati. Um, just sort of upper class Midwestern stock, like very maybe culturally Christian, but just generally kind of conservative. And his dad was a World War II pilot, and so just very, my grandfather, and so just like very very hard worker, very personable, great storyteller, really a wonderful person to be around. But I would say was raised by a World War II pilot father and very successful businessman who really kind of raised his kids up and then sent them off, and wasn't around a ton and trusted his wife to raise his kids. And so that was my dad's sort of upbringing. And so, he maybe unconsciously took a lot of that into the way that he raised myself and my brothers. And so we were largely irreligious, but generally took, I remember going to the voting booth with my dad this is funny. This is one of my first memories actually, of going in the voting booth with my dad to vote for George Bush and my mom to vote for Al Gore. And
That's
separately.
great. That's
And
great.
which is, yeah, it's funny. One of my very first memories. But generally just grew up like very especially post 9/11, just like generally centrist to liberal. Like what I felt like, at least in North Carolina, was like very mainstream. My mom was pretty liberal. And I, especially now looking back, I think it was largely like the reason we stopped attending church was that general, you might say Protestant swing of like, do we really need Jesus and church when we have, like, especially the post 9/11 sort of liberal order, and the right presidents are starting to get elected, all these things, progress. And so grew up at age 11. My parents got divorced. They had quite an explosive marriage that really fizzled out badly, and greatly affected my older brothers and I. And I would say that was the beginning. The other relevant thing would be I was a very serious tennis player from a very young age. So at 11, my parents get divorced, and I ended up living with my mom alone. My two older brothers both went off to college pretty shortly after that. But my mom and I lived alone when I was a teenager and had a very unhealthy relationship. My dad was still in town, but he and I would have dinner maybe once a month, kind of thing. And that was partially my mom's doing, and partially I think my dad just didn't have the tools to really do much direct fathering. And to what degree there were obstacles to that just made, I think, it probably well beyond what he was capable of to navigate. And that's, I'm trying to be generous, and so I largely did not have any. I mean, I had male figures in coaches. So I would say from 11 years old through to adulthood, before I became a believer, my life was a string of really incredible men, one at a time, who stepped in the role of coach for me. And so that's sort of the lens I understand formation, which would be through three men in particular who stepped in to be a coach and mentor at really like pretty seamlessly throughout my teenage years, that kept me from much darker paths, and that taught me how to work hard, taught me how to set goals and to believe in myself, and to just any bit of virtue, really. It was my mom, of course, and then these men. And so I went to play college tennis and lived the life of an elite athlete in all the discipline, but also was partying and the girls and all the things. And really, life went pretty well for me aside from my parents' divorce up through college. And so I don't think I had a single thought about anything transcendent except for like when I was smoking weed with my friends and talking about, whoa, do you think God exists or whatever?
Yeah.
Which there was a lot of that. So post college, my life kind of fell apart. I was playing professional tennis, and basically in the space of 2 or 3 months, I had a nearly career-ending shoulder injury, and my girlfriend of 4 years broke up with me at the same time. And so I was just left with kind of the two twin pillars of what you would say the twin idols of my life that I had like constructed my meaning off of throughout college. Totally just kind of evaporate. And I didn't see any of it coming. And so the only other detail would be I had been slowly having people, one of those men who'd been a coach ended up becoming a pastor and had been sort of in my ear. And a teammate I had who really stuck his neck out on a team full of hedonistic Europeans and me who all made fun of him for being a Christian. He was the most unbelievably, like, I don't want to say devout, but just like strong-willed and genuine picture of Christ for me throughout college, whether I knew it or not. And so when the bad things happened, I was able to lean on those relationships. And right at that same time, this is 2018, Jordan Peterson, by just a crazy podcast I listened to, a Tim Ferriss podcast. I heard about his book. I heard about his book through George Raveling, who just died recently. Was a famous UCLA basketball coach. He said the one book he recommends to everybody that he gives out more than anything is Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. And I said, oh, that sounds like a book I should probably pick up. And I hadn't been reading in years, but so I picked up the book and I looked him up, and I listened to the first Genesis lecture, and the rest is sort of history in that regard. And so I say all that to say I effectively reached a point where I was facing. I use the analogy. My dad is a scuba diver, loved to scuba dive, and he said when you go over the edge of a shelf, you always want to look. You always want to go backwards so you can look at the shelf, because one of the most terrifying things that you can do when you go over the edge of a shelf is to look out into the abyss. And I feel when I was 22 and those things happened, and I was on the road alone, hurt my shoulder, girlfriend gone, I was looking out into the abyss. And Jordan Peterson was the one who tossed me a rope that led me to Christ, along with these other people in my life. And so that was about 6 years ago. I am now married with a 9-month-old daughter. I've been coaching tennis since I retired from playing. And I am a non-denominational Christian. I guess I go to a Baptist church, but I have a very complicated relationship with the doctrine and beliefs of my church. But I've become increasingly interested in and dedicated to trying to live out a life of genuine communal discipleship to Christ with friends and family that we have here in Texas. And I guess the last thing I would say, I was really influenced by the strain of thought leading from Dallas Willard into John Mark Comer and some thinkers like that have talked a lot about discipleship and formation through the lens of Dallas Willard and his sort of framework, phenomenological framework. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Gray. So now we get to the pitch round. Show of hands, how many of you have a pitch currently? Because it's entirely optional. Just four or so? Because I'm debating whether or not to toss my pitch, because it's a heck of a bomb. But if we only got 4, all right, I'll start. I'll start with mine, and y'all can pick it apart. So here's my question. My question is, what are we forming young men and women for? What does it mean to be a Christian? I think we all sense that we are on, or at least I sense, I won't speak for all of you. I'll say just for myself. I sense that we are at the end of one era and the beginning of another. I see, for those that are trying to hold on to the thing that is already dying, that's where the anxiety, the anger, the sadness, all of that is apparent in our culture. Um, I think the image that comes to my mind of where we are is King Saul. King Saul. And for those that are used to King Saul's reign, we want to do everything we can to continue. It was a good run. We want to do everything we can to continue. And my question on formation is are we always supposed to form in the style of Proverbs and Sirach, be wise and walk in my ways, son, and you will prosper? Build something wonderful into the current structure. Or are there times where the primary posture should be one of the wilderness? Meaning, we don't know what's coming, but whatever is coming is an adventure. Time to turn yourself into someone that's ready for an adventure. And not to say that the cornerstones of Christianity are faith, virtue. We walk by faith and not by sight. I think those cornerstones are more essential than ever. But I think the things that we take for granted as we move between those stones are perhaps different. The ground is shaking underneath our feet. So I don't know what that means in terms of formation. I have a sense that our faith and virtue are more paramount than ever. But in terms of a specific guidance or a specific path, that I have less certainty than any time in my life. So that's my pitch. What does it mean, formation as a proper subject under King Saul versus formation in the wilderness with David? All right, whoever wants to go next.
Yeah, I guess we'll go in order then. That was a really good pitch. This is going to be hard to follow, but I think this is going to be related, so this is good. I'm going to try not to ramble. There's a bunch of things that I've been thinking a lot about, but I think I can coalesce a couple of things. The two kind of core concepts, I guess, that I'm really interested in, because my formation story, I love reading and I love learning. I don't have a whole lot of formal education in this stuff. A lot of my formation and what the kind of instruction that I do is really practical. It's really hands-on. And in a lot of cases, it's like regular, the epistemological basis is built on like life and death every single day, where like there's actual possibility that if you teach somebody to do something wrong, they could die. They probably will, in fact. And that I relate that to my own experience with formation as being taught all the right things. And Father Daniel, with your story, you're kind of hinting at this too. Having the right propositions, having the right ideas, this kind of separation of what we're calling formation or education from just the rest of life in a more holistic kind of way. So there's this aspect to which formation is participatory. And I think that's, that word, as Dr. Vervaeke is helping us kind of regather a part of personhood that's really important that we, in our Enlightenment period, have kind of jettisoned. We've separated the concept of schooling or formation, put it in this little bubble. This is supposed to happen in this specific institution and not everywhere else with the rest of life. Breaking down that barrier is really, I think that's critical. That's related to what you're talking about, Neil, because it's gotten to the point where formation has got to include things like how to just function in daily life. Like people aren't being taught how to have a conversation. People aren't being taught how to make a friend. Never mind being able to recite John 3:16, to do algebra. Like, basic life is the point at which we've gotten to. And then the other aspect, so that's the first. The second thing is the way in which formation is mimetic. It comes from people, and I mean not just people, but it has to be given to you. Like there's a sense in which you can't necessarily just go out and find it for yourself. It has to be taught to you, at least by example, if not explicitly. And that's paired with the first aspect, and that has to be participatory. Like, receiving information in a lecture hall is good and it's helpful, but it's not the same thing as getting side by side trying to accomplish a task, or trying to teach your kid how to do something, trying to teach a student how to do a task or perform a skill over and over again where they suck at it. And you have to help them side by side, and where there's real risk, there's real involvement. It's an on the ground dirty kind of thing. That's more integrated with daily life. And I guess those are my two cores. And the reason that I kind of got fired up about it was because I'm seeing more and more in the conversation, especially online recently, with it was the Nick Fuentes thing that kind of brought it to a lot of people's attention, but it's something that I've been paying attention to for a long time. It's critical to my formation. I was lonely. I know what it feels like to be lonely and to not be able to pull yourself out of that. And I know what it feels like to have somebody offer me a lifeline intentionally. That's not something I could have ever done to myself. But these kids nowadays, I hear a lot of older people using pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of language, whether implicitly or explicitly. Like, yeah, every generation's had their issues, right? You just have to figure it out for yourself. I don't know if I buy that. It actually kind of frustrates me, because you have to create an environment where the rituals are available to you to be formed properly. That's a skill that leaders can learn, to create environments and then to offer of themselves as exemplars, or as somebody who will love, who will give attention that can be conformed to. I don't see that happening, and I'm seeing a lot of people kind of missing the point. So I don't know if that counts as one topic or as three, but that's where my head's at.
Thank you, Corey. John.
Well, I was thinking of something different, but we had an estuary locally yesterday, and I feel like this is the pitch that won was identity, and I feel like that's one of the core. If I had to pick one thing, if our concern is this upcoming generation, that's one of the core problems I think that they face, is their identity. Who am I, and how do you determine who you are? And one of the things we talked about was how identity can be, it both emerges from the inside, it's who you are, who you're created to be, and it's like your individual identity, and a lot of it is received. Probably more of it is received than emerges. I don't actually know, but it was part of the discussion. You don't pick your family, your name, your country. Even I was a cradle Catholic. That I didn't pick that. Yeah. But being able to parse out things that are received and things that are emergent, I think would be really, really helpful for the next generation, because I think when you don't know what's emergent and what's received, sometimes you think something might be malleable that isn't, or something that's changeable that isn't, and you could spend your life trying to change something that isn't really changeable. It's not emergent, it's received, or vice versa. And then what might it mean if you received your identity from Christ, or you found your identity in Christ, or what I mean? What might that, obviously most people on this call would value that and understand the value of that, but how might we then be, if we're thinking of the next generation, how might we help them with this area specifically in identity? Of how might we, like Corey said, create an environment where an identity can be participated in or acted out or received. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I was thinking about.
Thanks, John. Kale?
Yeah, this is great. The think where my mind has been lately, and it dovetails with a couple, and I'll let people do the weave and whatnot later on. But in Matthew Crawford's book, The World Beyond Your Head, he talks about jigs, using like the jig that a carpenter uses to cut, 15 boards, in precise fashion. And so you install a jig on top of, or you construct a jig, which is a constraint in an environment in order to reproduce, the thing. And one of the things that I have been chewing on lately is, you know, do we even know what, do we have a salient cultural jig, a cultural jig which is both sacred and profane, right? That that forms. In other words, is formation possible when either there's no longer any form, there's no longer any agreed upon jig, um, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of authoritative structure that will say this is good formation, this is bad formation. I feel like we live in a world. I wonder if we live in a world in which we're functionally agnostic about formation because we're functionally agnostic about the form that we hope people will be formed into, right? And so I really kind of want to just focus on, from whence do the forms come? And is part of the crisis that we find ourselves in, especially as we look at our own children and the upcoming generation, you know, can you form people in a kind of functionally agnostic world?
Thanks, Cal. Bill. Oh, sorry, you're on mute,
Oh,
Bill.
you're muted.
Nope. Still corn cob.
Yeah, corn.
Yeah, there you go.
New software. I have been thinking about, with respect to this, the going back to that piety study action stool I spoke about during my formation, being a kind of liturgical way of living, and it making a, the seat of the stool. For this thinking made me think about, well, what's the seat of the stool? If the legs are this kind of liturgical, what is the seat? And I see heads shaking. And I thought, it seems like the seat is relationship as I think about it, which is a weird kind of a thing to say, I think. And there's an aspect here where I'm seeing that all of my formation has come out of relationships, and relationships, I'll say, in action. But that action is formed by something that sets the boundaries, and in the life I'm talking about, we set those boundaries through our practices with God for intimacy and our study for our brain. And when that informs our action, those three things work together, and then all our relationships start to fall into place. And so therefore we can now sit on this life of grace, which is a relational position informed by what action we take based on our relationship, our liturgical piety, and the studying and the renewing of our minds that we're getting. And maybe there are pieces or elements of that could help inform any of the four topics. And I'm not sure that even frames a full topic, because this was like the first pitch in a real estuary I think I've ever done. But that's
excellent. Very good. Father Greason.
So I will have to draw upon something, well, my experience as a priest and the things I've had to struggle with in regards to formation. And the way I've kind of formulated the things that I've experienced is there's different kind of, I kind of think of humans as, although I'm Orthodox, so, like a Russian doll, right? There's like these various layers that make up a person, right? And the challenge that I find so often with trying to help as a priest and not as a professor or not as a dad or not as a friend, but as a priest, is that there is so much brokenness. It's kind of like Kale's jig. And I'm coming at it with one aspect, not that they're all belong together. And I'd say there's a hierarchy of, but if the inner doll and the next one and the next one are all not working out, and then you're trying to do spirituality on top of that, it doesn't work, right? Or you're going to have to get some tape or something to try to keep it together because it's not going to screw in and it just doesn't, or parts are just going to be left out of it. It becomes very challenging if, as the saying goes, Kale, I think you've probably talked with Larry about this ad nauseum, probably, grace, a healing nature, and nature's twisted and messed up, and they work together. I'm constantly struggling with, as a priest, I can't wear 15 hats. And the culture is so decimated or wilderness or whatever. Like, how do we begin to try to get those things back together? Because they all do work together, but it's just, where do you look for the models? Because there's TikTok channels of guys acting like your dad to teach you how to like tie your tie, change your tire. Like we're in a really bad spot, and I think all of us, when everyone talks about burnout, everyone talks about like exhaustion. I know there's a kind of energy that comes in this corner of the internet because there's a kind of a zeal and a renewal and an igniting of seeing like there's a vision and there's all like life has meaning. But I think I will be interested what happens, because it can become a grind, because yeah, you get the vision, but then you need a lot of other things operating at a communal level. That's not just the church, but that is like education, that is family, all of these different things. So how to formulate that into like a single, how do we get back to or find some path that's not over spiritualizing? Because I think the challenge I see is some folks, they want to like over spiritualize and they miss out on basic formative things, or they're so focused on these little tiny things they don't have a cosmic or spiritual vision for things. So that's what I probably am constantly wrestling with.
Thank you, Father. Ross.
Well, I didn't have a pitch, but I'll give it a shot. Never been a part of an estuary before. One has come to mind now. One of the ways that I've tried to talk with our 20-somethings about this is in the language of something like, this is cliche, but something like an iceberg, where get back to Zepp's point, to find your identity, you have kind of the part of the iceberg that's on the surface, and just to sort of disturb people a bit, I call that creeds. People tend to think that your creeds are like the deepest down part of you, but I actually think it's sort of the most obvious part of you. And at least it's the most conscious part of you. It's the things you say you believe. And then for me, the next level down is deeds. And so this is kind of borrowing some language from Jesus, but it's what you not what you do randomly, but what you habitually do is actually a deeper part of you and reveals something deeper, maybe even about what you believe, than what your creeds might say. And then maybe the lowest level that I use, I just call it needs. It's convenient because it rhymes with the other two. I don't really mean it in necessarily the modern therapeutic sense, but maybe in the Augustinian sense, right? What we're made for, the sort of hole in each of our hearts, and the intimacy that we all long for. And so you could map something like, the porn addicted Christian man to all three of those categories at the same time. And they would say on the creedal level, I believe this is evil. I would never do anything, like this. And on the needs level, you can see there's some hole where they're looking for some kind of intimacy that they're finding in this, terrible addiction. But it's the deeds level that tells a different story than their creeds, in a sense, which is that they keep on circling back to this thing, even though they don't know why they keep circling back to it. But it still reveals something quite profound. Even disturbingly about their identity, about what they love. And so for me, I think this has a lot to do with what's missing in formation today. I think we're like men without chests or whatever. If you consider the chest to be the middle part, it's like we don't know how to form people's habitual beings very well. And so we have, whether you take the modern secular version of it, or in my case, the evangelical world's version of it, people know their creeds really well. If you gave a good Young Life talk, you talk all about, this is the things that, this is the way, these are your deepest needs, you get the needs right. And then you'd say, here's the things you believe that will fill, that deepest hole in yourself. But you hardly ever get that formational piece in the middle, which is, and here's the hard part of how, mastery begins, how some kind of deeper relationship with yourself and with the reality around you and the constraints of that reality have to conform to one another. So I think I'm interested in that question.
It's great. Thanks, Ross. Gray.
I just want to talk to each of you individually for like 4 hours. I have no pitch. I think I have a lot of things to say, but I suspect that I'll be able to connect them to most any pitch that you guys choose. But you all, those were wonderful.
All right, I'm going to point. I'm just going to mention my two favorites, but I am going to point to one. So my two favorites were John, the identity question. What's the environment to create identity? And Bill. I thought, Bill, you did a phenomenal first pitch. The legs of the stool for the legs of the stool. What came to my mind was Charles Murray wrote about legs of the stool, and you said the seed is relationship. Yeah, but I'm going to point to John because I think what I really want to know is what is the environment to create the identity that will support the stool.
All right, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to the two that I really loved, and then one that I'm actually going to point to. Avoid doing too much weaving, but I think we'll get there. So Father Daniel's and Ross's. So we have the iceberg and we have the Russian nesting dolls. I love these images because I think a big part, and I'm hearing a lot of this coming up in what everyone's saying, is that our anthropology is messed up. Like what a person is, we don't have a really good sense of what that means. And I think that a noetic understanding of the person in like the Eastern tradition, the Eastern Christian tradition, is something that can help us see a picture of how that iceberg works, of how we can get those nesting dolls to integrate. So I love those two, but ultimately I'm going to point to Kale's because he said my favorite A word, authoritative authority, which is it's my obsession. Like, to a degree, you have to be willing to submit yourself to constraints. But in a world where everything's falling apart, we're living in the wilderness, all the institutions aren't trusted, the things that are supposed to constrain us, nobody trusts it anymore. So the question becomes, who do you trust? What authority do you trust to have constrained your life? Who do you submit to? I think a lot of the answer has to do with revelation by beauty, which is a whole. I don't know if we'll get there, but I do think there's some very healthy weaving that we can do with all the topics. I'm hearing a lot of overlap in these, so I'm excited. Kale's is my point.
All right, I think I'm up. I'm going to point to Neil. What are we forming our kids for? And I'm particularly struck by your image of Saul. And I'm going to do a quick connection to something from Alistair McIntyre in his conversation at the very end of the book, which Rod Dreher makes a big deal about, which is at some point, the talent of the generation leaves the Imperium and decides that the Imperium is done, and in some sense heralds a move away from trying to shore up the dying Imperium or the dying form, and um, uh, construct some new mode of being. And so I'm struck by his notion that the old structure is dying, and that are we spending too much energy trying to prop up Saul's kingdom in over and against, or instead of rushing into, I guess, David's kingdom. So Neil gets my vote.
Thanks, Kale. We skipped John. So
Oh, I'm sorry, I
go
can't
ahead.
see
Oh,
anybody. So
totally
Kale
fine.
can't see. It's all good. Man, these are some good pitches. I'll tell you what. I think I'm just going to have to land on Ross's, though. I like the idea of the deeds, creeds, and needs. I like I like how they're all related, and when you think about formation, it doesn't always start with one and go to the other. And your deeds, if you act a certain way, it can change who you are on the inside. And that can be part of formation, so we don't always think in terms of like you come up with an idea, then you act it out. You can act something out and it can affect your ideas, so I don't know. That's what I was thinking about as Ross was talking. And I think we forget that sometimes, at least in the head spaces. We want to focus on ideas and less on actions. So that's what I like.
All right. Well, is for Father Daniel. And I think the reason for that, in addition to what you gentlemen have said, is the immediacy and urgency of it. And that Father Daniel is dealing with these issues and wrestling with them on the ground, in the mud and the blood right now. And there's a certain, like I said, immediacy of that I think is most attractive to me.
Thank you, Father.
It is always amazing to me how everything starts to weave together. Because it's going to end up weaving together anyways, because I like everybody's thing. So I like Ross's 3-point sermon, creed, deed, need, and using that as a skeleton to be able to talk about you are what you love and how we need to. Because what I try to do with catechesis all the time, I do some intellectual stuff, but it's mostly trying to like, what do you do? And trying to track actual, like, what do you, let's take a look at yourself and see what's actually going on, and talking about strategies or ways to get to those things. Because out of those habits, yeah. So I'm pointing to Ross, even though everyone else's, I think, works really well.
Thank you, Father. Ross.
My two were Kale and Neil. Do I have to choose one? I have to choose one. Kale's question. Well, I'm going to go with Neil. If I have to choose one, I think, like Kale said, I guess I'm agreeing with Kale here by going with Neil. I think the Saul to David question is really interesting to me, and it has some resonance with some of my own thinking. I've thought a lot about the transition from Joseph to Moses is the way that I talk about this moment. But I'm very interested in what particularly is going on with this moment that makes formation so hard, which is also what Cale is asking.
I will. I'm not sure if this is necessarily pointing to Father Greason's, but I latched onto one thing you said, which was where are the models? And so I think I actually want to point to Ross's, but I just wanted to mention what Father Greason said, because I think it pairs really well. I mean, the whole Russian nesting doll pairs really well with Ross's pitch and the iceberg, and focusing on the men, or the chest, the men without chests. But that piece, connecting that piece of where the models are, and how we think about that, I think is relevant also to that pitch. So I just wanted to mention that, but I'll point to Ross.
Cool. We got 3.5 to Ross, because I wasn't
Yeah.
sure which of the two, Corey, you pointed, but Ross is the clear winner thanks to Gray. So the way this typically goes is, Ross, if you want to lay out more of your thinking on creeds, deeds, and needs, and maybe, and I think you've then thus earned the right to begin the weave, and others can continue. So
Well, I didn't think mine was.
Ross, could you
Oh,
do the Moses Joseph at some point, or weave it in somehow? Because I'm curious about both Saul and David in that.
Yeah, I think that's more interesting anyway. But we'll see where the weave goes. Yeah, I think. Well, maybe I'll start with that, and then we can see it, how it weaves together. So I the way that I read this moment, and this is related to creeds, deeds, and needs, is, and I'm speaking mostly for the evangelical world here. I don't really understand or know how it would apply to the Catholic or Orthodox world, but for the world that I come from, we're at the end of an era. I think there was a heyday to evangelicalism, and it is past. Not every evangelical knows that it is past, but that's always the case when things pass. And I think that heyday, without needing to say anything bad about it, I guess, just to say what it was, I think it was a Joseph movement. I think that's actually saying something good about it. I think that there was a moment where, like the story of Joseph, we were, many Christians were sort of moving up in the world, I guess, and we're taking center stage. People like Billy Graham were even literally they were the right-hand man to presidents, very much like the Joseph story, and filling stadiums and all of that. And I think it changed the landscape of our country in certain interesting ways, and has defined a lot of people's faith to this day. And it has led to, I guess, what we would now know as the megachurch movement, which I think you can't escape. Even if you go to an evangelical church with 50 people in it, you're still sort of like in the megachurch movement in one way or another. And I think we have, if you turn the page from the last page of Genesis to the first page of Exodus, you see this kind of shocking moment where the Pharaoh has forgotten Joseph, and the next story is a story of a man who is not blessed in every way. Even though Joseph and Moses both have their issues, Moses is, his issues don't become blessed. He kills a man and people don't celebrate him for it. He has a strange zigzagging call that is not the upward mobility of Joseph. And eventually it's a call to go to the wilderness, which is how this, I think, has to do a lot with Neil's pitch. And that's, in my opinion, where we are. And what I guess I would say, in a way, to sum it up, is that the Bible is made of holiness and inclusion. You could kind of use those as two main themes. And I would say that they're two streams that seemingly run in opposite directions, right? Holiness means set apart. Inclusion means to bring in. And so they literally mean opposites of each other. But the beauty of Scripture and of the Christian life, I think, is that it is a marriage of those two opposites. It is in Christ, those two streams run together. And somehow we have this crazy paradox or contradiction of holiness and inclusion becoming one in the same person. And so it's not like you have to choose inclusion over holiness or holiness over inclusion. But I do think that there are prophetic movements where you have to see which one God is restoring in which season. And so if you're in the wilderness with Moses and you're saying, no, we need to include, we need to go back to Egypt, you're actually the one that's in the wrong. And so you need to sense what season you're in. And in my opinion, we are in a restoration of holiness moment, at least for evangelicals. That's the case. And I think that has a lot to do with what I meant by deeds, with inculcating our lives, what we do back with our creeds. But I don't really mean holiness in a moral sense. I guess I mean it more in a set apart sense, in a sacred sense, in making sacred spaces and in participating together in a sacred religion. We've had a long season of relationship over religion as evangelicals. It's probably time to find a religious relationship. So,
And now it's open table. So, gentlemen, whoever would like to jump in.
I was involved with the foundation of this nonprofit in inner city Cleveland. And that was a chaotic place. Eh? And our main goal was to get to the holiness point. So the woman who developed these programs, the Cleveland Foundation discovered this effective program in a small church. I mean, really small church, like 30 people. And they managed to get a grant for training. And then they got told, you need to take this out and grow it. So I showed up at the first, people interested in forming a board to start this nonprofit. And after they milled around for too long, in my mind, I asked, does anybody have an agenda for this? And the pastor turned to me and said, first agenda item is to elect a president. I nominate Bill Merkel. And a bunch of people said aye. And the next thing you know, I was starting this nonprofit up. But the main point was that we pulled that out and we grew that from around a $20,000 budget to, my memory is around $650,000, $700,000 during the Great Recession and in the years after. And that counts in-kind work. And it was a 6-week education through arts program for inner city children during the summertime. But the beautiful thing about it, and the thing that gets to the middle, I think, some of what we talked about, is she had developed what I thought of as a 3-prong approach. She started with tutoring, math and reading. But the way she did that was relational, because she would have children tutor other children. So older children tutor younger children. And then she would make sure that the children from the neighborhood where they usually would fight with each other because they were across the wrong streets were tutoring the kids from the area they weren't supposed to like. And now grades started improving. And then by bringing the arts in, that also opened up parts of the brain that improved academic performance among all these kids. So they were learning academically they were learning how to achieve academically while they were relationally learning how to get along with each other. Then certain ones of them that showed leadership potential, she would develop those, and eventually they would go to work for us. So we'd start paying for them, and they'd start getting money for the first time, and they'd start learning job skills and showing up on time. And she was able to do that personally with them again and show them how to be an employee. So now their education is going, and their relational, like how to tie a tie, that kind of a thing, is growing at the same time. And then finally, all of that was to introduce Christ. And so during this whole thing, it was, the summer program was the local Catholic high school allowed us to take it over for free. So we took over a small high school in inner city Cleveland and ran the program there, for example. So there was no doubt that this was a faith-based thing, but it wasn't strictly evangelical. But those children would get invited into youth groups. And eventually, just the number of children that accepted Christ became youth pastors, became policemen, became, strong Christian people. And I still see them on Facebook today now with kids and families and raising good things. So what does all that say? It says the incredible difficulty is the amount of love and effort it takes. So when you think about that program, you had to be like living with people in that community for an extended period of time. And the payoff for us was at the end of the summer, these children would put on a presentation for their parents. And so by the end, there was more things than a child could do. Did you want to do drums and chorus or acting and visual arts? And you'd had to like pick your courses to do during the day. And all of this would be presented at the end of the summer. And we always had many parents come up to us, sometimes in tears going, I didn't even know my child had this in them. And there's like this renewed hope in their eyes. Like, my child is not trapped in this identity I think that they're in right now. There's something more here to grow. But think about the enormous cost of that. We hired teachers out of the Cleveland Public School District and paid them over the summer. So these are professional teachers. There's care and love the whole way through. And I guess my fear right now is what Meta's starting up a nuclear reactor to power the AI engine site. And when we talk about the internet, it's kind of like there's that extremely time and expensive relational thing that I know works up against this giant like thing that needs a nuclear plant to make it. And like, how do we win against that? But from my formational experience, it's that kind of level of work that's required to make it happen. And I think a lot of the church that I've seen doesn't understand that. So when somebody talked about earlier, why can't they pull themselves up by their bootstraps? I remember having an argument in a bar with a woman once, and we got into this, and that was her approach. And I told her, look, you just don't understand it. I'm telling you, as a guy sitting here in one of the better suburban communities in Cleveland, that if I was trying to raise children in that neighborhood, I am pretty sure I would fail. I would not be able to withstand the forces that are going on. And if you don't believe this, if you want to help, yes, I want to help. Here's what you need to do. You need to find a nonprofit somewhere down in the inner city. You need to go there for 3 years, work. And when you've been there for 3 years and you've fallen in love with the people you're serving, you've earned the right to open your mouth and start asking questions about what should happen here. That's kind of like where it's at. So I don't know how that informs or gives hope to anybody, but that's my experience for how to build that middle. You just can't come in and be all spiritual, right? It was building 3 things at the same time and weaving them together in a highly humanly expensive way.
Yeah, I think, I think the temptation is to think that everything scales, right? And especially as regards formation. And, what your story tells me or calls to my mind is that, part of what makes that nonprofit work is it's really local, it's really personal, it's really high touch. And you weren't worried about what was happening elsewhere And in other places, like you were, the focus was entirely on those kids, those specific ones in front of you. It's sort of a push against, the abstraction of the machine on some level.
Mm-hmm.
The one of the 3 points or parts that you brought up from that program that strikes me is the kids mentoring the younger kids. I see a lot of things first through the lens of athletic development, because of my own story and the fact that I've been developing elite athletes now for 7 years after being one. And one of the things, I got asked a question a few months ago by I think he's like an AI researcher on Twitter who is working for this company called Alpha School that is like developing an
Yeah.
AI school, and they've been big on Twitter the last few months. And this guy, they have a sports academy sort of offshoot, and they tweet all their marketing. The actual venture is incredibly hollow, but the marketing is really good, and they make all these claims about work, the type of athletes they're going to develop and students and all these things. And I just replied to this guy and just said, he described the approach, and I just replied and kindly said, you will never develop an elite athlete, at least not consistently. If you do, it will be because you struck gold. Every squirrel finds its nut, but you will not consistently produce elite athletes that way. And he was kind and humble and replied back and said, I see you have experience with tennis. What have the best academies? Like, how do you do this in tennis? And I told him, here's the difficult truth, dude. If you look at the history of elite tennis, you will not find a single, and I mean not one, academy on this earth that has been able to consistently produce world-class talent like a factory, like the way that you guys are talking about in your marketing, ever. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And one of the big reasons is, so you could take there's a lot of different academies, a lot of different examples, but you can take what people think are the most important ingredients, which are great coaches, and talented players, and maybe the third would be like adequate resources. And people think that makes a great academy. The best coaches in the world, really talented players, tons of resources. Boom, we're going to have a Grand Slam champion. This is what the U.S. Tennis Association has thought for the last 25 years. And we have not won a Grand Slam since 2004. So obviously they're wrong. And the issue with that is you miss all of the really incredibly situational and like seemingly, you could throw it under the word luck, but just the variables that come together to produce a champion, and especially a string of champions, like Andre Agassi and Jim Courier and some of these guys that came out of Southern Florida in the 80s. You realize when you look at these stories, or I've experienced it, I've been at academies like this, and I've with college teams as well that I've coached, where you have a team that's number one, and you think it's our system, it's us, we're great coaches, it's the players, and then something happens, like what happened for us at Baylor a few years ago. The number one player in college tennis played number one for us. This is the year before I actually came to Baylor, and the next year he was supposed to come back for his senior year and lead the team and be number one again. He goes pro halfway through the year, so he screws everybody over. And for one semester, just one semester, they were without a leader and a true model. We're talking about 5 months, and a few seniors graduate along with him. And the next year, they bring in, my first year, a unbelievably talented group, 3 former top 20 in the world juniors. These guys, like, they should be taking college tennis by storm. And it took us a year to realize, I mean, we could not get these guys in line. This kid from Hungary was ready to go home 2 months in. Like, just we were racking our brains. Like, what do we do to get these guys like on board? And like, they're so talented. Why are we not getting this production out of them? Why are they not becoming the players we thought they would? And I think I was the one who said, guys, I think the fact that Adrian left last year set off just enough of a chain reaction of a gap in leadership and model that now the next guy didn't know what to do as a leader. And so then it's like, and this cycle for 3-4 years, like still really that team that everybody thought was about to start kind of a dynasty, is still rebuilding from one loss of a, what is Peterson calls it, the zone of proximal development.
Yeah.
And so that just made such an impression on me, because it's like, you can, if you think you can create a factory to create any kind of like really aspirational, whether it's an athlete or if we're talking about holiness or whatever it is, formation, like if you have missing links in the middle of the chain, like you're very quickly going to find that it's difficult to reconnect the top to the bottom. And that's very, very true in athletics. I can say that for sure. But I the last thing I'll say is, in my experience in the church, like I go to a big church. I do not know my pastor. Like he would never know. Like I saw him in a coffee shop. I'm not even going to say hey, because he wouldn't know who I am, and we'd have to do an introduction, and it'd be weird. So I'm not even going to say hello to him. And we have deacons that are over various ministries and in between. And, like our life group, which is our closest friends that we are really trying to live the Christian life with, we got like an email from our deacons this morning. Very kind, super kind people. And just they're like, hey, our role, our job, our mission is to serve you guys. And then at the end of the email is basically like, reach out if you need anything. And like, like nothing, they're great people. That's awesome. And, but it was like, man, I don't know if you really want me to reach out and tell you what I need, because like what we need is like, we need models of holiness that are not afraid to say like, hey, here I am, follow Christ as I follow Christ, like follow me as I follow Christ, rather. Like those are those missing links in the chain that we need. And I'm not saying up to my pastor as if he represents some unreachable level of holiness, but I guess it's even in function or form, like that zone of proximal development, that like older leader on the team. To me, when I first became a believer, I had a few guys in my life that were really like that, because I was starting from zero. And so I had some amazing guys that were like my age, but had been really walking with Jesus for even just a few years. And they said, hey, read this C.S. Lewis, listen to this John Mark Comer, Dallas. They pointed me in directions and said, hey, like come read the Bible with me, 7 a.m. Let's like wrestle with Romans, whatever it is. And they brought me from 0 to 2 out of 100 or whatever. And that was like incredible. But then I got really curious, and I started reading a lot, and I started listening to a lot, and I started like really leaning into this. And you don't get very far before you then realize, like, you look up and it's like, I'm not very holy or very accomplished, and I definitely have no idea what I'm doing. And I don't really see anybody around here who's ready to help me go any further, except for C.S. Lewis, who's been dead for 60 years. And can't talk to me. So just that those missing links of like the kid that's going to tutor the other kid, like Bill didn't have to tutor all the kids himself, like you guys set up those rungs on the ladder so that they could climb and get a better view potentially of Christ's feet, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Can I want to volley a question off of that. No pun intended with the tennis. So like, I love this picture. You almost had two separate things going there, where there's the tennis world where you see the mimesis in action in a sense, right? And there's like everyone's thinking like, what's the product that we want? What's the material outcome that we want? We want the highest performing possible tennis heroes. And then we have one person on an active character departs, and what that does to the material that we've got. My question is for Ross, if you wouldn't mind, just I've surfed a little bit. I'm from California. I know how hard it is. I love the image, and part of why I actually thought to invite you to this, because you're kind of living the practical holistic thing. You've got a camp going that's about formation. It's basically about formation from what it seems like. And I want to know if you have reflections on the connection between building the character of your leaders, your college students, and like the connection between their spiritual formation and how effective they are as surf instructors. Because I think that if we tease out that relationship, we could get to something that's profitable here. Does that
Yeah,
strike
good question.
anything?
Yeah, that's great. I would say the place that I've seen the most formation happen with young men, especially, but young women as well, has been in the 3 months that I lived with them every year. You know, in that place in my life, I've seen what I feel like are miracles over and over again, and I have with our campers as well. But it's especially with the staff, and I think that maybe the main. I mean, you know, to get back to what Gray was saying, you can't. As soon as you start saying, well, this is what I think, you know, is the main thing, then you discover that you can't, you can't reproduce it exactly like you think you can. But I think one of the most powerful ingredients about what we're doing, and it's not anything that it's just the nature of it, is you're dealing with the ocean. It's scary. People can die. And so from day one, I don't hire people to do them a favor. I'm not even there to make sure that they grow. I basically like sit down and tell them, like, if you make mistakes, people die, probably like you do as well, Corey. And so, and that I think just it's a sort of heightened sense of like I'm needed, and that I think is like the beginning of real formation. And I would say it goes as far as, you know, sometimes every year near the beginning of the summer, I have a talk with the men in particular about pornography, which is sort of unrelated to all the other training. But I'm basically like, look, we're taking care of teenage girls, among other things, all summer long wearing bathing suits at the beach. And so if you think that you can continue to live some kind of secret life by yourself that does no harm to anyone, and I'm not assuming that you are or you aren't, but statistically, some of you probably are, that's not going to go well. It's not something that I actually will tolerate, even for a moment. And that might sound, you know, really extreme to you, because it might be something you've been trying to give up for years, that you're struggling with, you know, but you can't struggle with it any longer. And it's not for you. It's not for your own personal piety. It's for the well-being of this community. We can't have secrets here, especially not secrets like that. And that sort of thing, you find it's almost like people can do the impossible if somebody needs them to. They can do something they've never been able to do for their own personal piety reasons their whole life, but they can do it overnight, you know. And I've still seen struggles, and I've seen people struggle, but also I really have seen struggles end, you know, almost overnight, when someone knows that they're needed, and when someone knows that they're being called to something higher, and that there are real stakes. Because it's like, okay, well, what if you can't deal with this? Well, then I have to fire you, and I have to replace you in the middle of the summer. And that makes a bunch of kids unsafe too, because now I'm down a surf instructor when I hired you for the summer. So really, you can't let me down, because I can't fire you. So we're all in this together. Welcome to a more holy life than you've lived before.
I just gotta say, I love the image of the holy surf instructor.
Yeah.
If there's anyone in my mind that's the furthest thing from holiness,
I know. Yes.
And truth be told,
aware.
I'm probably thinking of the California surfers and not the Virginia Beach surfers.
No, it's all the same. It's all the same. But yeah, and that's obviously part of the beauty of it too. Is, like I said, we're not even known from the outside, not even known as a Christian surf camp. And I'll hire sometimes, you know, kids that are good surfers that are not believers. But I tell them before I hire them, when you come here, like, I'm not watering it down for you. It's like, imagine that you moved to Iran, you know, and you didn't expect there to be some kind of like religious devotion all around you all the time. That's the culture shock you're into going. And I literally, like, we do Bible studies every morning. We pray with the staff, even the ones that aren't believers. And I warn them, I say, like, if you don't want to like be culture shocked by Christianity every single morning for an entire summer, because they think it's like a, you know, romantic, like, oh, I get to go to the beach and do all these things. And it is, it's actually really fun. But somehow a number of years ago, I just discovered that I could do that and that nobody would stop me from doing that. And so that's the way we do it. And every year, you know, our staff become Christians. And again, I think it comes back to the, you know, to the deeds part of it. It's almost like, you know, someone needs something of them. And so they step up to it and they realize how beautiful it is to be needed and to be able to add to a community, be able to participate in something immediately rather than someone asking you what you believe. It's just sort of like, I don't know what you believe, but you better do this with us now. Ready? Here we go.
I strongly believe that the all-intensive experience works, or not, maybe not for everybody, but it works for a lot of people. And I went on a Cursillo style retreat at the start of my Catholic journey. It's called Acts. And now
Oh, yeah.
that's probably the most important ministry that I'm doing in my local community. The New Orleans Catholic church or diocese is in dire financial straits, just declared bankruptcy recently, had a string of church closings because New Orleans has been predominantly Catholic. Population in New Orleans is still lower than it was pre-Katrina. But not only that, as the rest of the country that has not historically been Catholic gets the diffusion of Catholicism. So that places like Texas and Baptist areas are getting more Catholic, but the areas that are previously 100% Catholic inevitably get less Catholic because the mega churches move in and the Baptists move in, etc. So, so you got churches closing and people don't know the future. But what we have figured out is, hey, we put together a coalition of faith-filled men in our general area. Doesn't matter what specific church that we're from, and we throw a retreat for it. It's called for the West Bank of the Mississippi River. And so the first year, it's led by an outside church, and there's only maybe like 5 or 10 men that go on it. And then the second year is 20 men and 30 men. And so this year it's just West Bank guys, just us. And we think we're going to have 70 retreatants. And that would be something like an 80% jump from last year. Like people deeply sense that the status quo ain't cutting it. And they need something to reinvigorate. But I also hear people in the corner like Michael Sartori that want to start, like a carpentry school partnered with a church. Yeah. And they don't, somehow there's a disconnect where either the ministers, the pastors just don't know how to pick up the entrepreneurial side and run with it with the people that they trust. They don't know how to, maybe it's the relationality that Bill was talking about. They're so not used to it. And what's ironic is that, at least within Catholicism, my church is part of an order called the Salesians. They're not very well known. They're only about 180 years old. But what they are known for is the youth and the poor, and they do a lot of trade schools in third world and stuff like that. They've been very successful. Not so much here. So like what is that disconnect between the pragmatic and the spiritual that we're missing? That's, yeah.
Can I maybe pull a couple things together and go back to the action word? And your weekend is acts. So I assume action is a lot of it. What I think I'm realizing over the last couple months, and I'd love to hear feedback. What I've noticed in the past is I'll hear people say, I'm studying and I'm reading my Bible, I'm going to church, and I'm now closer to Christ. I don't feel any different. There's nothing really changing in the way I live or act. And I'm like, well, you're missing the third leg. You're missing action. What are you doing? And that's become so critical in my own life. Events, small or large, that cause action, small or large, done in the context of what I'm training my mind and looking for, is what grow my faith and what grow my holiness. And without action, it stalls. It completely stalls. There's something about, dare I say, as an evangelical, working. I'm close to the works world.
Yeah, careful.
Yeah, careful.
Be careful. And I'll share a little bit of a mystical experience with the father that I told you about. For most of my life, I had like a performance anxiety. I was never doing enough in my action to hit a certain bar. And after, many decades of this, there was a moment in prayer where I swear I heard the Lord say to me, I love working with you. And I went, wow, that kind of makes sense. Was not Adam put in the garden to work it? there's something very holy about working with each other, doing the carpentry, doing the tutoring, just getting out and doing something. And what I've noticed is when you see miracles happen, you don't normally see miracles happen when you're in prayer or in piety or studying your Bible. Where do you see miracles happen? When you're out doing something. And then what does that do to your faith? That feeds it. So I feel like that an important part of the relational piece is that working part of it. And anything that's going to reach the folks we're talking about has to involve some sort of relational work. And it's a problem because it's very difficult to scale. But if it's true that it's a requirement, a nuclear plant powered machine is not going to be able to do it either. So maybe there's hope in that.
You know, Bill, as you were saying that, I remember I had a pizza shop, as I said, beginning working with my son. My oldest son worked at the shop, and it was such a great experience. Just I loved working with him. You know, even just we'd have a busy night. We'd just get slammed. It was very difficult, very demanding physically. And then a lot of times we'd end up being short staffed, especially through the COVID years. And my son and I would go back and do the dishes, and it would be hundreds and hundreds of dishes.
Yeah.
And we're just in there just gutting it out, you know, after working a long shift, you know. And there's just something about, I just loved it. And it was terrible, but
Yeah.
working with him,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I think something else you said about when you're working, your faith grows. I would broaden that out and say, in my experience, when you're working, that's when you grow as a person. I mean, I think it's even more, and I've seen it at the pizza shop, having, you know, employed literally 300 or 400 teens over the course of those decades. That kind of like Ross was saying, kids would come in and they had no skills, and it was, you know, they're really struggling. The first job, a lot of first jobs. But I noticed a phenomena that would happen is when, you know, a guy would come in, it's his first job, he's struggling, and everybody's kind of helping him a little bit, helping him along. But then when I hired another guy, and he's not the new guy anymore, then he starts showing the new guy things, and then you can just see that they just level up almost immediately.
Mhm.
That happens so many times. And then parents would come in, and a lot of times I would know the parents of the teenagers, and they would come in, they'd look in the back, and they'd just be like, what's going on? I never seen him work so hard. I'm like, he's great. He's great worker. And they just, their mind is just blown, you know. But they grew while working. There's something to that. And I'm wondering if all of our talk about scale is just kind of an artifact of the modern way of thinking. Maybe it can't scale, maybe it can only grow, and maybe only at the speed of relationship. You know,
Scaling is machine talk.
Say that again.
Scaling is machine talk.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, agreed.
But growing, you know, is more organic.
You're organic, yeah.
Relational.
Agreed.
I don't know.
I agree it's formational, and I'll make one other quick point. That work is often painful and sacrificial. Remember when I said you have to go fall in love? I told the woman you have to go fall in love. Well, how do you know you're in love with the people you're serving? Well, you're laying in bed at night praying for them, and sometimes in tears, because you understand the situation now. You're seeing it through the eyes of Christ because you're engaged with it, and it hurts. It hurts in a great way, and it hurts in a way that's reforming you. But it's not like all fun and games where I'm watching people just form and their identities grow. It's hard, tough work.
I wonder, you know, after Bill, you described the summer program and making the point you just made, I you know, it's some in the back of my head or tangentially, I'm I'm thinking of Ross, your parish manifesto, which some may have read or not. So maybe I shouldn't have even referenced that. But it's just maybe a call to localism and community. And I just wonder, how do we take the intensity of a weekend like Neil's weekend and the formative power of Bill, like the relationship you're talking about, and bring it into like just our everyday life in our communities? Because I think, like I have a lot of friends, being in Texas, a lot of evangelical friends who had a similar maybe formative experience to you, Zep, but even more micro, which was like a Young Life weekend retreat or something where they really came into the faith. And it's like a pretty common experience for people in evangelicalism to talk about like the come down from that kind of thing, where like bringing it home is hard after a weekend like that, and you're kind of looking for that next like intense experience. And like in our community, we've been like with like spurts and stutter, like very slow starts, trying to adopt more of a communal rule of life with our 4 families. We all have young kids, and yesterday we all did our first conjoined Sabbath, where we all Sabbathed at the same time from Saturday night until Sunday night, and we've committed to doing that in 2026 all together, and trying to forego traveling as much as often, and just one of the guys owns a small business, and he's saying, hey, on Sundays I'm not gonna work, even though it's very tempting to, and just we're trying our best to enter into that, and it was just hilarious because we go to church at 4 p.m. on Sundays, and we kind of went to church, and our Sabbath ended afterwards, and we're all just catching up, and we all were like, it was like, how was it? And we're honestly, we all were really idealistic. We're like, it was kind of a letdown. Like it wasn't this big, like amazing spiritual high. And it's like, just in thinking about it today, I'm like, why would I mean, granted, it's good to be an idealist in some sense. And I think there's things we can do practically to sort of, if you can get better at Sabbath, get better at that practice, but also, maybe it's not going to be this big, like emotional experience. It's just, that's not what it is. But do we trust that week in, week out, that practice will have the effect on our souls, and our families, and our entire view of time, which is maybe the chief reason for the Sabbath, is so that we have a holy view of our time. I'm hopeful that is like the beginning to our community being able to take more steps into things like seasonality and the calendar of the church, and these other kind of practices that will help us reclaim more of a truly Christian view of time, because I'm sort of answering my own question here, of how we reclaim and bring it into our actual communal life, because it feels like kind of adopting this view of our time, and then you go from Sabbath to maybe having more, like you said, Bill, times in your week that are set apart for the work of the church together. And it's not like once every now and again going to the food, or the homeless shelter or the food bank, but it's like, this is part of our lives here in this community, and developing those relationships. So
I got some thoughts in that. Many thoughts. I'm going to try to combine them all quickly. One is that you have to remember the parable of the sower. The reality is that for the people who go to a wonderful retreat experience, it is the parable of the sower coming out of it. And I think it's actually helpful to remind people even at the end of those experiences. And the parable is that, you're really excited now. You're on fire for Christ now. Let's see what happens a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. And that kind of opens, and then if you actually go through the parable of the sower, and people are like, oh, wow, okay. And then there's a Renick mind flip that happened for me somewhere along the line. And this goes to Zep. what you were talking about in the beginning about identity, and also Bill, you talking about doing things. And so much of the identity question today is dependent on how I am perceived. That you perceive me, that, and not just you, is everybody perceives me this way. And it's what am I receiving in terms of perceived identity? And the arenic flip is like, suddenly if I begin to derive my identity based on what I'm producing, based on what I'm giving, based on how I'm acting, and if I'm now, I can be judged by other people, I can be corrected, and if my behavior isn't measuring up, but I think I can only be confident in that identity in terms of my giving first and foremost from the one that's above all of us. But that's a serious mental mind flip, because then no matter how bad the arena gets, so if the arena gets terrible to the point where you feel like you're not, and I'm just talking about in terms of subjective perception of arena. So if you feel like you're not getting anything, but you can derive your identity from what you're giving, then the worse things get, the stronger your identity becomes, because the worse things get, then the more opportunity there is to do something about it, you could say. So it's the opposite of powerlessness. It's sort of like, oh, there's the most need for me to take, there's the most need for me not to make this worse right now. It's particularly critical. And then it's so I don't know how to instill that mental mind flip. Like I honestly think that really is the Christian story. It's like, pick up your cross and follow me uphill. And yet my burden is easy and my yoke is light. Sorry, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Sorry. But it's true. It's true, because once you do that flip, it's like, what else am I gonna do? I got nothing better to do.
There's a thing that I've started to do with some of my students. It's kind of estuary light, but it's more directive. And I always, the students that I'm assigned to, I'll take them through 2 conversations where I ask them 2 questions. The first session is for the first question, and then thereafter is for the second question. And the first question is, what's your why, is what I ask them. Because there's this, I think part of what we have to do is reveal what people's desires are, right? Because most of the time, I think most of us are walking around not really aware of what our desires are. And this is very much going back to the iceberg model that Ross was talking about before. I think the machine creates an environment that masks your desires, like in a way that's kind of backwards to say, because we have all of our desires attached to all these different passions all the time. But really, I think if you actually ask people what they care about, so I teach at a school where people work really, really hard to get there, and for a lot of them, it's like what they want to do for their whole lives. So they're very much on a track, right? They're plugged into the machine, and it happens to be lined up with a very high desire. But then I ask them, why do you want to be here? Okay, whatever the answer to that is, why do you want to do that? Okay, well, why? And it's just a simple exercise you go through until they don't know the answer anymore. If they're a Christian, they'll often get to, okay, what's my life purpose? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Okay, if you're a Christian, you have it kind of built in. If you're not a Christian, most people haven't thought about very many high levels above a certain point, so they kind of stumble and think, why do I want that? Because I guess everyone else says it's a good thing. I don't know. So then they can start thinking about that. But once you've done that, then you go to the second session. And you start asking, the way that you live, based on what you've told me you care about the most, does the way you live your life, your habit patterns, your actions, does it actually reflect with integrity? We talk about integrity not as honesty, but as like being integrated with what you claim is the thing that you desire the most, the thing that you claim or you think ought to be the thing you care about the most. Just in looking at those 2 things together, I think starts to reveal people, and the way that you're talking about, Neil, I think that has a little bit of a capacity to perform that flip. The other aspect that's kind of built in my context is that since I'm an instructor at a school that people really want to get to, they look up to you. They want to be like you. Like that aspect of it is really built in. And I think that's the other key aspect to this. If we can become as saintly as possible, as holy as possible, not like in the moralistic sense, but in the sense of when somebody encounters you and you love them in a way that they've never experienced before, which is really, really easy to do, by the way. I mean, you all know there's people out there who've never experienced that before in their whole lives. If you can give them a taste of something that goes all the way down to that bottom level of the iceberg, that goes to the needs, a taste of something that satisfies that a little bit when they've never experienced that before, they're going to want more of it. They're going to want to be around you. You've become like a shining, salient thing. It has to do with desire, has to do with beauty. I think we can. This is a thing that I see a lot of Protestant spaces arrive on, making disciples being so critical. Like we identify, we want to help the people at the bottom for sure, but the way you do that is actually by empowering other people to know how to do that, to be leaders, to be Christ-like. And I think you have to be able to create spaces to do that. So now the machine's been invoked a couple of times. The machine destroys your capacity to see what you actually desire. It erases your needs, right? Your perception of what your actual deepest needs are. Because again, our anthropology is all screwed up. So when you can start to reveal the needs, and if you can exemplify those needs, then you have the desire built in. Now, practically speaking, you can do this with a nonprofit if you get enough people together who have the same kind of vision. You can do this in a church, again, if you have enough people get together with that same vision and that desire already brought out. But that's, the machine has infected so many of the churches now. It's hard to do. But I've seen this most effective in things like estuary groups and in things like functional families. Like when you invite somebody in to dinner in a family that's, it doesn't have to be perfect, a family that's just functional and eats dinner together. If you invite somebody into that who's never experienced that before, because there's a lot of people, everything reorients in a sense. I've had this experience from the other side. That's creating a space. So I guess without ranting, I don't want to, I'm losing my train just a little bit, but I think there's a connection between being able to reveal desire by exemplifying a way to meet those needs at the bottom of the iceberg by your deeds that creates the desire, but you have to be able to create a space where you can do that with the jigs, with the proper constraints in place. But you can do that. Like, I think that's what creating disciples means, is teaching people how to create spaces. You can make a cognitive space. You can make a summer camp. An entrepreneur is able to just build a business that has whatever constraints you desire. If you're a father in a family, you run the family. You create the constraints. That creates a formal structure that you can invite people into, and it reveals things when you go into a structure like that. So I think there actually are some practical answers to what you're talking about, Neil. And I wonder sometimes if we go too big, like it's the scalability thing. Because if we take responsibility for the little bit of space that you actually have authority over, you can do that. And like you can do it really, really, really powerfully. But you need to have somebody teach you how to do it, I think. Stop there.
Let's do a round of, because we've been going for 2 hours. It's been a great conversation, but let's do a round of conclusions, because I know it's getting late for some folks, especially Ross and folks on the East Coast. But real quick, Corey, well, I'll save it for my conclusion. We'll go to Zeb.
I mean, I guess as we were talking and thinking about scale and growth and how do you replicate this kind of thing, I think if we scale, we'll probably get pretty broad, but not very deep. And then what is the impact of that? But if we think in terms of like locally, or like my family, my kids' friends, people at my church, my community, and we try to impact them, we could probably go pretty deep. And ultimately, I think probably that would have a better or more meaningful impact in the world, rather than going broad and an inch deep.
My turn.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Evan.
I was going to make that pretty much that exact point. You can't be trusted with large things until you can manage small things. And the small things starts with you. You know, always remember the main problem with the world is me. And then it's the structure I built for my family or my community or whatever. You're like, how do I address that? What can I do there? And then as God makes provision, doors open up or they don't. And that's all right. Because if all you do is raise a great family, in many, many places, that is almost a miracle. That is nothing to downplay or feel like you haven't done anything. If all you've done is built a 4-family community that raises healthy children, that is a huge accomplishment. And so, don't worry about the scaling so much. That's a machine word. Worry about you. And I think you guys have also helped me. I think I'm locking in on this relationship, this weird relationship between works and relationships. And to use Pajoian language, I think there's some sort of fractal going on in there that scales from kids tutoring in Slavic Village, Cleveland, Ohio, up to whatever size and scope you want to get to. So I'm going to have fun meditating on that for a good while. Thanks, guys. Father?
Thanks for joining us, Bill. It's been great. Yeah. Father?
So my brain fractaled out in 3 or 4 different directions. So thank you. As soon as you said Slavic Village, I started thinking about. I think one of the things that, without just repeating what people are saying, but that is that the key of like what faith actually is as trust and belief that God can bring life out of death, and that I encounter so often with folks, and it's not just folks, it's myself as well, right? Of that gap between what is desired and what is actually happening. So, for example, how often I'd have parishioners who are lonely and they, are talking to me about their loneliness and how nobody talks to them or nobody, and almost always my response is, depending on the person and situation, who are you being a friend to? Like, what are you doing? Because if you're just waiting for somebody else to do something, you're just going to wait for somebody else to do something. It'll never happen. You are going to have to be the friend that you want, not to yourself, but to other people, and you will find friendship if you actually reach out. And what may seem like you're going to die in doing that, because maybe it's scary or maybe you're anxious or whatever, you're going to have to die. And guess what? You'll live. You will find life when you die. And that is what faith is. You have to die.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary, but that's exactly the crux of the matter. So
Thank you, Father.
Well said. I think I'll go back to Neil mentioned the parable of the sower. The thing that really strikes me about that parable, and it's kind of hidden, it's not in the parable itself, is I think part of the setup for that parable is to show that Jesus is the master soil tiller. He's like, because part of it, when you read that parable, you can see it almost as this helpless, like hyper Calvinist sort of thing, where it's like, I hope I'm the fertile soil, because otherwise I'm done, because it doesn't work out for any of the other soils. And I don't think that's what's going on. If you see it, especially in its place in Mark's gospel, what you see is that Jesus has been making good soil out of the disciples already. And the rest of the gospels is really just the story of this really patient, incremental soil tilling of their hearts, so that when that final moment comes, when they're going to have to stand on their own 2 feet, they will be able to, because they will finally be. And it's not even, the crazy thing is, I mean, it's risky because, even when Jesus dies, they're not ready. It's so patient. It's halfway through the book of Acts, and Peter's still like, really, Gentile inclusion, this is what we're doing. But it's perfectly patient in that he takes over the world, with his version of soil tilling. And the way that it starts, I think, is, you would think the way that people talk about it these days is that he would come and he'd just be all information. He'd just be, here's the gospel, here's what I'm going to do, here's who I am. But instead he just says, follow me. That's the way he starts tilling the soil. It's the best soil tiller is just having a little bit of authority and saying, come and do what I'm doing. I'm not even going to give you anything more than that, but come and do it with me. And then they kind of bumble along. And of course that's what people do. But, imagine doing that with your alcoholic uncle or neighbor or something like that, instead of trying to preach them over and over again that they're an alcoholic and they need to change. Just a little bit of soil tilling, one day at a time.
I'm fired up. That was, you guys are great. I enjoy this. I'm going to have a hard time falling asleep. I have two thoughts. One, Bill, you sparked it. So since my daughter was born 9.5 months ago, so I lost my job about a month and a half after she was born, which a few of you know, but it was incredibly fortuitous. I mean, it was just an incredible blessing, frankly, for a number of reasons. But the chief one being that I was paid through the end of July. This was May. And then the job I stepped into has been incredibly flexible. And so I've gotten the gift of getting to spend just a tremendous amount of time with my daughter, that I think most men especially don't often get to do for their children. And so I don't know that this will be the case with the rest of my children. Probably won't, but this has been just the most amazing gift. But I've had a lot of time to, especially before she was mobile. Now she's quite mobile. It's like very exciting. But especially before she was standing up and trying to find all the pots and pans and things like that, there was a lot of time of just going on walks and around the neighborhood and just sort of thinking and praying and walking. And but even just today, I was thinking, I'm not loving necessarily the lessons I'm giving for work and things like that. And I was just kind of on that train of thought of like, what's the Lord going to call me into? And I'm impatient and I don't want to wait on him and wait on whatever maybe next. But then I was just looking at my daughter and she was just smiling at me. And I remember I had this feeling or this thought of like, man, there is nothing more important in this entire world than like this moment right now, being fully grateful for just the unbelievable gift and blessing of my daughter's humanity, and like the honor of getting to walk alongside her and steward her as one of God's children, and just the joy in that, like just her smile encapsulated all of that, and seeing her walk and all these things, and even connecting that to like, like Bill, your point was just like, even if you just raise a good family, or have a community of 4 families that raise good children, I think of the beginning of, you guys have to forgive me, I think it's Luke's gospel. I can't remember which gospel begins with the genealogy, but maybe it's Matthew. I don't know. Yeah.
They both do. One's for her, one's for him.
There you go.
Double right.
And you look at all of those names, and I just, if you think about the parents of any of those names in that lineage, there was nothing more important that any of them could have been doing than loving that ancestor of Christ in that moment. And Bill, what you said just sparked that for me, and it just connects to that moment with my daughter. It was really, really special, and how I can love her into being. And I don't necessarily need to have a system for that. I just need to be present to her in those moments and grateful for that. And the second point, very briefly, would just be for from the perspective of the youngest guy here, I think I know that there is a huge need. Well, to go back to my sort of analogy of the chain, I just know from the perspective of this link in the chain, maybe whether I look at that age wise or just development wise as a believer, whatever it may be, there's a great need for men that are of the age. I know there's a span of ages here. You guys are not all, it's not a monolith by any means, but for people that are one step or a few steps ahead of, or 10 steps ahead of where I'm at, there's just a tremendous need, I think, for guidance and help, and just taking that first step of a relationship that Father Greason just mentioned. And that's not to take the responsibility away from me or anyone my age or whatever it may be, but I find myself and friends, in need of that. And our fathers have dropped the ball in some cases every way, but in most cases at least a few significant ways, and continue to. And with that aforementioned baby running around, there's not a ton of time for me to be doing the first step right now. And so it's just, again, maybe an encouragement to all of you guys, to whatever degree you guys are able to help the guys who are young fathers and who are in sort of the stage of life that I've been in, between college and starting a family. And I've just been so grateful for, even just in this little corner with guys like Ross, we talked last year, and Neil, we've talked a bunch, and Corey and Zepp, like I've talked to all you guys, and Jordan Hall, who's spent 7 hours in conversation with me when he had absolutely no reason to do so other than just generosity and following the will of God for his life. And I've just been incredibly grateful for how, not how much I've learned, but how much I've been able to just feel like I've grown from the conversation, not because of what I've learned, but because of what I've seen in you guys, and continue to in the relationship, and knowing that I can, come to people like you, and it makes a big difference. So from a young guy, it's needed, and it's I'm grateful for the degree to which you guys and others have played that role. But I know that many, myself in an embodied sense, I don't have that here really where I live at all. And there's something that's missing when it's not embodied. And for friends, I definitely know that they have nothing at all like it. So just encourage you wherever you're at. And if you find an opportunity to step into the life of someone who's around my age, even if they don't know they need it, they need it. So.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Gray. To close, I really liked Ross's analogy of the soil tilling. And the better I get to know the Gospels, the better I sense that what Jesus was aiming for in his ministry was not breadth of people, but depth of people. And time again, he says things and does things that make most people go out. They leave. And then some come back. And Peter, will you go away too? And Peter, I could just imagine Peter exasperated, where else we gonna go? You had the words of eternal life, and but that image of cultivating soil over time, and just we fall and we get back up, and we fall, and people go out and they come back in, they go out and they come back in. And I've had this intuition to have one foot firmly in my local community and doing things firmly in my local community, and then I've had an equally potent intuition that says, no, we need to stand by the door, 1 foot in this virtual community we call TLC. And people go out. And I apologize to Tayo for doing some navel gazing. That's an inside joke, but Tayo is directly for you. I'm doing some navel gazing. We've got people in TLC that go out and then they come back in, and they go out and they come back in. And but in every stage of that, these virtual connections where we sometimes meet in person, I do sense that they're growing stronger, and the relationships are growing stronger, and seeds are being planted both individually, but then in collaborations between people in this virtual space. And I don't know where that's going. And I'm not saying I firmly believe that the local is also absolutely essential, but there's something that we're doing here that's different than any other virtual space that I've ever been a part of. So yeah, anyway, I don't know how else to end. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been awesome. Hope we do
Thank
this
you,
again
Neil.
sometime. And I'm going to stay on if you want to stay on, but I'm going to end recording here. Good night.